Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly shot in the arm for motivation and inspiration and education on your path to success with myopia management. And for this episode, we are continuing our Road to Vision by Design 2025 series. My guest is Nate Bonilla-Warford from Bright Eyes Family Vision Care. He is a specialist in vision therapy, sports vision, binocular vision, but we know him best for myopia management. Nate, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here.
All right. And we are going to get into his lecture that he's doing with Dr. Michelle Kim at the conference. But before we do that, Nate, if anybody has any questions about anything we discuss and want to follow up with you, how can they get in touch with you on the internet?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is by email. I'm still an email guy. So doc at brighteyestampa.com. So DOC at brighteyestampa.com. And I check that pretty regularly.
All right. And if you have any questions for me about this episode, myopiamindset@gmail.com. And if you want to support the podcast, you can do so at myopiamindset.com. Okay, Nate. So before we get into the lecture for Vision by Design, I want to get some background about you because I've known you for years. You're a remarkable optometrist. You're an amazing orthokeratologist, a myopia management specialist. But I think what you're known best for in our world is you have cultivated this amazing pediatric practice. And I think I would love to go into that in greater detail, but let's start with the fundamentals. How did you get into myopia management?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting when I think back. So I did my residency in pediatric vision and binocular vision in 2005 in Chicago at ICO. And then I moved down to Florida. We opened Bright Eyes, our practice, in 2006. So next year will be our 20th anniversary, which is a big deal. We need to have some sort of big party for that. And so right from the get-go, we knew we wanted to be specialists in vision therapy and pediatric care. We knew we wanted to work with providers in the community. We knew we wanted to get the word out. We really wanted to develop that area. And as we were doing that, we were doing it effectively. A mom brought in her daughter to me, and she basically said, I've heard about this thing called Orthokeratology, and I've heard that it can help my daughter have less worsening of her vision, and I would like you to do that for my daughter. And I was kind of blown away because I was not a contact lens specialist by any means in school. And I said, well, okay, let me look into it. And I said, okay, let's give it a shot. And so I did some research and I talked to my colleagues, and we did it, basically. And I'm pretty sure, if she hadn't have come into my office, or certainly not that long ago, I mean, because that was a long time ago, my practice and my life would have definitely been different.
Yeah, that's amazing. And to just have a parent come into your office and ask for Ortho-K, I mean, especially back then.
Well, yeah. And actually, I have even another story. I had the exact same thing happen to me with atropine. I had a patient who said, and I don't remember when this was, I want to say this was probably 2010. And she said, my father is a ophthalmologist, and he's been reading the research on atropine. And so I would like for you to prescribe my son 1% atropine, and you're going to follow him and see if and by that point, I did know about atropine, but I was kind of scared to use it. I think a lot of us in the States back then, 15 years ago, were still a little nervous about atropine. That was before a lot of the research that's been published. And I said, okay, here's his progressive lenses with the transitions. We live in Florida. There's a lot of light,
Right.
and amazingly, he tolerated it incredibly well. No complaints whatsoever. And so that was sort of my crash course in atropine. So that's kind of happened to me twice.
That's amazing. Yeah. And the the part in which you begin to cultivate that aspect of your practice. I mean, you always wanted to have pediatrics in mind. Let's
Right.
fast forward a little to what your practice looks like today, because you have, in my opinion, the ideal thematic elements of your practice. Like you and your team figured out early on, if we want this practice to be for kids, we need to make this office look like it's for kids. So
Right.
describe the aesthetic and how you interact with your patients and the staff and all of it.
Well, I mean, if you hear consultants speak, they're constantly talking about um, culture, and I really want to say I believe in that entirely. So even back when we had only 4 employees, and now we've got like 20. We really invested in the type of people who were interested in growing and providing the kind of care that we wanted. The people who were simultaneously able to talk to parents and able to talk to kids, on their level, sometimes literally getting down, on the floor. So, I mean, I really think it ultimately starts there. But I think kind of partially what you're getting at is when we knew that we needed to expand. We've expanded multiple times in different ways, but the big expansion was when we opened the second office, Bright Eyes Kids, and I had no model for that at the time because there weren't really other practices that were doing that. And so what I did is I went to pediatric dental offices all around this part of the state. Went to about a dozen, and they were everything from kind of miserable buildings that weren't inviting to kids at all to like way over the top with like one was like literally like in a circus tent. There was a tent and there was stuff hanging from the walls, and I was like, this is too much. And so we, from the very beginning with Bright Eyes Kids, we tried to make it kid friendly, lots of like we had small like furniture for kids to sit on that's like, and we have Duplo Legos. So they're not going to choke on them, but they can
Mm-hmm.
still play with them. And, and that those little things go a long way to keeping kids comfortable. And when they're comfortable, the care is so much better because you can do a lot more with them and you can kind of win them over, really quickly. At the same time, it's all very clean and it's all very professional and it's sort of minimal we don't go overboard, but we have a lot of, artwork and toys and things around that, really make a difference. We try to make it, fun but still professional, and I feel like we've really found that balance. It's actually just super fun to come to work and just be, in the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And the office needs to fit, the doctor and the staff in the office. I've sat in on practices where they're trying to figure out what their aesthetic should be. And they've said, Matt, should I go like, and do something like what you're describing? And I said, well, is that who you are, doc? Because at Herzberg Optical, the practice I grew up in, it did not look like your practice. And we still saw tons of kids. You
Right,
can do it multiple ways, but what I love most about what everything that you just said is you can, like, I've known you for years and that just fits who you are. Like, you have Legos in the practice and you know how to talk to kids. And
right,
I love the you have the dual nature of being like, kids need to feel comfortable here, but also mom needs to be able to walk the door and be like, okay, this is professional. This is not a clown college.
right, right. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about the lecture, and then I want to go more into your, you and your practice and your staff, because working with kids is such an amazing part of myopia management. There's a lot of it that's overlooked, or people take a lot of shortcuts on it.
For
So
sure.
let's get to the lecture first. Now that we have some background on you, because you're a regular boot camp speaker. And I think you're perfect for it because, not only are you knowledgeable and you have lots of great information, but you also teach very well and you have the experience to back it up. So tell us a little bit about the lecture that you and Michelle are doing.
So it's called the myopia patient profile, and it's actually kind of awesome because back in the very beginning, first with Ortho-K, and then atropine, and then multifocal contact lenses. At least it was in that order for me. It's not necessarily that way for everybody. Back in the day, and certainly, for the people who came before me, who built all that we do, we didn't really have like a profile. Like we didn't have data, we didn't have research that we could point to. It was just like, okay, well, we're concerned. What tools do we have? But now it is a lot more sophisticated than that. So if you are a doctor who is just getting into myopia care, you can do it much more intelligently, and you can take stock of, okay, these are the factors that these are the factors that I know, and some of them, and we'll just kind of go through a few of them, but some of them are things that are totally outside of the patient's control, like
Mm-hmm.
their genetics. They just are what they are. And some of that is their ethnicity, but some of it is their individual family history. Because if you have a child whose mom and dad and grandparents and older sibling are all progressive, myopes that are very high prescription, that, especially during the school age years, well, you're going to be much more aggressive or much more concerned about that child than if they don't. If now it doesn't mean that they might not be a candidate for myopia management, but that's one kind of point on their scorecard. So that's one thing that's just a fact that you should take into account. But there's also their own, lifestyle. Are they sports out constantly, outside? You can't bring them, inside. Especially down here, in Florida, you can play sports year round, and some kids do. They play three different sports. They're constantly, on the field, doing something. Well, you're going to have a different impression for them than the kid that I was when I was a kid. A bookworm, doing rudimentary coding on my Commodore 64. You know what I mean? Um, so that's another aspect. Another total game changer that happened, during my career was the mainstreaming of optical biometry. I mean, knowing axial length. I mean, nowadays I can't even imagine not having that data at my fingertips, both to sort of assess initial risk, but also, for monitoring, progression, and of course, their refraction, what their prescription. So the point of the lecture is, it seems very overwhelming in the beginning. Oh my gosh, there's like all these patients. What do I do with them, and which ones do I need to worry about, and which ones do I need to be totally pull out all the stops, and like, all right, we need to panic, that patient, versus the ones that are like, yes, it would be a good idea, but we don't have to go all out. And so this sort of gives people early on, I think it's like the second or third lecture in the boot camp series. So this sort of gives people a way to like understand, okay, we're going to collect this information, and then we're going to use this in our decision making sort of downstream.
Right. And it's so important to have like you and Michelle there to kind of walk the newbies through it because like you said, it can be very overwhelming, especially, if you're just starting out and, what in the practice I grew up in, it's like we had the patients that it was like a four alarm situation. We need to do this now. We need to impress upon them why this is important. But the average conversion rate for the practice I grew up in was 5 years before we heard anything positive. It was, we would tell them about Ortho-K every single
Right.
time they came in, but it wasn't until that 4 or 5 year mark on average that we actually saw a turnaround. And I'm so glad that we have so much more at our fingertips now. For instance, like you had mentioned, axial length. Axial length, talk more about what a game changer that is to actually have data to put in front of mom because what I was used to is you can tell the parent all about myopia management, Ortho-K, if you have actual numbers, if you can show actual progression,
Right.
your eye got longer. So go more into that about how important axial length is then.
Well, I guess one thing is uh, not only, people barely understand refraction. Like they know, okay, you've got glasses. They don't really want the glasses to get stronger. Like they kind of have a sense of what that is, but not really.
Hmm.
But when you say, okay, their eyes are growing too fast and they're stretching, and the tissues of the eyes are like literally can change over time as they stretch. That gives them, something kind of more tangible to understand. And then when so even just generally, you can talk about that. But when you apply numbers to it, especially when you say something like, and I'm not somebody who wants to scare them into treatment. I want to educate them so that they understand, what factors I'm considering, kind of like getting back to the profile as we're talking. But when you tell them like, okay, the eyes continue to grow, throughout, early and childhood and later years, teenage years as they're growing, but your 7-year-old already has an eye that's significantly bigger than most adults, and it's only going to increase from here on out. Well, that gives them like this image. They're like, oh, okay, because I can see, I can see that. Likewise, being able to say, okay, we've been treating your son for 5 years, and in that time, they've increased approximately zero point 0.1 millimeter or whatever. I mean, that's like impossibly
Yeah.
small to even think about. I mean, that's really encouraging. They don't really know exactly what zero point 0.1 millimeter means, but they know it's really, really small.
Hmm.
And we have that conversation, daily, or some version of that conversation. And I just want to say one thing, and I don't know if this is still kind of a thing, but there were a few years, maybe 3 years, where we were doing contact A scans as opposed to optical biometry. And I just want to say it was better than nothing. Like
Hmm.
we had some data, especially to kind of gauge that initial visit. Like, are we talking 23 millimeters or 25 millimeters? But in terms of managing progression, like that was kind of a nightmare. You had to numb the cornea with proparacaine. So I don't know if people are still doing that or still, if you're just getting into myopia control, I would say do not go that route. A lot of us did early on because that's what we were kind of familiar with, and there weren't the variety of tools there are now. But that's one thing you should not skimp on
Right.
is an optical biometer of some sort.
Yeah. Do you think that axial length is going to become, I mean, I think it's going to become the standard of care, right? But like, I remember the days where docs were attempting to fit Ortho-K without even having a topographer, and
Yeah,
it
that's
was the
true.
stance of the AAOMC that you should be using a topographer. Are we going to get to a place, do you think, where the messaging of the AAOMC is like, you should be doing axial length?
Well, I think so. I think so because already we're starting to see instruments that just combine axial lengths with other, with topography or and so as all of those uh, instruments improve and become more widely adopted, I really think it's going to become hard to even imagine really doing um, myopia care without having some kind of measurement or or understanding of sort of where that is. I mean, yeah, I think there's always people who practice on all different kinds of ways, but I think in terms of the mainstreaming, I think that's gonna be inevitable. I think that
Mhm.
is just absolutely where where we're headed.
Yeah. Let's go over like what the because I don't want to give too much away from the lecture because obviously it's going to be great and boot campers are going to get a lot of information at boot camp. So we got axial length, we have manifest refraction at the rate of change,
Right.
child's age and age of onset, parents manifest refraction. Can you go more into that? How much do you recommend work being done on the parent?
Well, so a couple different things. One, we before they even set foot in the office, if they're referred or if there already are existing family, because they're kind of internally referred, we don't request that we do an exam on the parents, but we do have an intake form that asks a lot of these questions specifically for this reason. Um, and people don't necessarily understand on the form, so we'll ask the question in different ways. Are are one or both of the parents nearsighted, and and then it'll be the same kind of question, but are one or more of the parents highly myopic? Well, they may know what nearsighted is, they may know what myopic is, but very often they'll say that they are nearsighted but not myopic,
Huh.
or vice versa, because
Yeah.
they're not specialists like we are. So you have to make it sort of easy for them. And so we don't necessarily quantify it at that point, but then once we know that they are, well, then in the process of doing the evaluation, we will talk to them, and it gives us an opportunity to look like geniuses, because you can just look at their glasses and see, as you're talking to them, oh wow, they're clearly -7 just by looking, so you can talk to them, and you can kind of, if this is your kind of personality, it isn't everybody's, but I kind of like, sometimes we'll make a game out of it. Like, let me see what, I can guess you're probably what, -5 or, whatever. And so that can be kind of fun, so that's one way to kind of, or that's two different ways to get that information. But you said something else that I think we're understanding now in a way that we didn't 10 or 15 years ago, about age of onset. And that
Hmm.
is so critical, because um, it it's sounds sounds kind of funny to say, but I'm very conservative within my particular progressive sphere. You know what I mean? Like, I
Hmm.
do vision therapy, and I do Ortho-K, and I do myopia control. All of those are pretty progressive things. But I'm pretty conservative within that group. So, I don't do Ortho-K on absolutely everybody. I mean,
Mm.
I have done some kind of cowboy-ish things, but that's not what I do all the time. And so when I'm talking to parents for years and years and years, I'd be like, okay, well, let's take some measurements. Let's have them come back in 6 months, and then we'll take some more measurements, and then we'll kind of talk about it. Well, now we know from research that that is just not the best way to manage this condition, because the younger they are, the more we need to be concerned. And because it is a unidirectional process, it's, myopia doesn't fluctuate, well, I mean, it does within like a tenth of a diopter or whatever, but I mean, generally speaking, it only worsens. And so it is a completely different case if they're -2 diopters at 12 years old or -2 diopters at 6 years old. And that gets back to the lecture and all those other things that we talked about. And so those are the kind of questions that we ask before they come in on our intake form. At what age did they get glasses? And I also have a question that this is not a quantitative question, but just sort of like, how worried are you about your child's vision? And they may say, I feel like it's getting worse rapidly, but they may also indicate they are totally not worried about it, because in their life, that's what happened to them. They're
Right.
-6 and they're totally fine with it, and they have glasses, and that doesn't necessarily change how we manage those patients, but it does change how we communicate with those patients, because we also have ones that have changed a quarter of a diopter each year for 3 years, and parents are panicked. They're just unglued. So we kind of collecting that information as much as possible, in addition to the quantitative data, gives us better ways to communicate with them.
Yeah. And it also starts planting seeds right
for
away.
Sure. Oh,
Which
yeah.
That's what I love the most about, I mean, I love everything that you said, but that's what really shone out to me, is because, the practice I grew up in, that my dad, as the optometrist, would have his whole thing about how he, step by step, this is how he talks to a parent during the exam to cultivate and educate, that whole thing. But to actually have a form is to start planting those necessary seeds so that you can come back to them during the exam. For sure. I love it. The next part in the session description is about behavior, screen time, and outdoor time. And again, I don't want to go too much into the lecture. I just want to preview it. But are you guys giving the attendees some actionable numbers that they can deal with for screen time and outdoor time? Because this is a huge mystery. When I've done consulting, I've gone into offices and they're like, the doc says, I don't know how much screen time or how much outdoor time to, recommend or move against. So is your lecture going to be able to outline these for the attendees?
I mean, it's going to reference some numbers and, some studies which have, suggested, different things. I mean, I think we can all kind of agree that as far as outside time, generally speaking, more is better, or at least to a point. At some point it probably doesn't matter anymore. But for most of our patients who are mostly, in school, they're just not getting enough. And especially, and I just want to say this, because at least down here and probably everywhere, there's a 180-degree shift. In that summer, it used to be, you used to worry about, eye strain in the winter, and in the summer, everybody's like, outside and playing or whatever. Well, now, at least in Florida, they get out of school and then it's so hot, they're just inside on their tablets and on their phones. And so I routinely hear about behavior changes, about asthenopia, about kind of weird eye movements, about dry eye symptoms, all of these things. And they were constantly like, yeah, this only started happening about a month ago. Well, this is about a month into summer because kids are on their devices all the time. That's an anecdote. That's not really directly related to the story, but I mean, I feel like that is 100% my experience, like so much so that I pretty much expect it now.
Yeah.
Now, to get to your point about yeah, so there's some research that's sort of referenced as far as the screen time. A lot of that sort of touches base on another component which we haven't really gotten to yet, but that is sort of binocular vision function. And what I tell people is, these are this is what I tell my patients is, as far as screen time goes, there's kind of two rules of thumb that people should think about. One, bigger is better, meaning if they have the choice, they should watch a TV versus any sort of handheld thing. If the bigger the screen is, the farther it is away, the better it is for them because they don't have to look up so close and their posture isn't so dependent on what they're doing. And the second thing is it's less about cumulative amount of time in the screen and more about how long they're going in between breaks. Meaning, if they spend a half an hour on an iPad 4 times a day, I'm much less concerned about that if it's intermixed with outdoor time and other things that they're doing rather than 2 hours, playing Fortnite. Can you play Fortnite on an iPad? I bet you can.
I bet you can.
I have no idea, but I bet you can. You know what I mean? Because
I would not be surprised.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can. I have no idea. But my point is that, it's not all about and parents always want to know like how much time, and they want me to give them a number, 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever. And the reality is, one, it depends patient to patient. If I have a patient who is maybe not a full-blown accommodative esotrope, but they've got like esophoria, well, I am much more conservative with how much time. And I'll even say flat out, like, yeah, some kids can handle, they have friends that their eyes can handle, more screen time than they can. Like they're, you're just asking for trouble if they are spending that much time on like a handheld device because their eyes, I can just tell you right now, are not gonna like it. So to some degree, it's sort of tailored. It's only a 1 hour lecture and there's many different components. So we don't get into tremendous detail, but I think it's more like things to think about. Like, for example, with outdoor time, research was done that said that the amount of outdoor time you get before age 10 directly influences how much progression they're likely to have after age 10. Well, that's a really long time period. And that really says we need to be educating like early and often because they're not symptomatic yet when we need to be getting them that information, and so I think things like that are kind of what boot camp is for. Are there access to research and data? Absolutely. But, knowing things like that you can kind of file away for later when you're talking, I think when you're talking to parents is what really the beauty of boot camp is.
Yeah. Vision by Design and Boot Camp, aaomc.org is how you find out more information about the meeting. It's April 22nd through the 25th in Palm Beach, Florida.
Let me just say one more thing just real quick. And
yeah.
I feel like everything that I've just said, like, that's easy for people who have years or decades of experience. And the whole point of boot camp is to try to like distill 20 years of experience into like bite-sized pieces that you can sort of like use, even though you don't have, the whole point of being in boot camp is that you don't have that experience.
Right.
But you're not gonna like read well, people don't read textbooks in the same way, but you're not gonna get that same sort of messages that you get from boot camp if you're like reading blog posts. Like you can do that and you can get some good information that way. But knowing that you're in the lecture and you're hearing these little pieces, and then knowing that immediately after lecture, you can go talk to them and you can be like, that was an interesting point. I would like more information on that. And every single boot camp lecturer is going to be happy to have that conversation with you. I just wanted to say that that's one of the things that makes it so special and unique.
Remind us again, if anybody has questions for you about anything we've talked about in this episode, how can they get in touch with you?
The email, like I said, doc@brighteyestampa.com. That was sort of a naive thing I did when we started the practice. I was the only doctor, and I'm like, oh, I'll just make it doc. Not even thinking like, oh, I'm going to have a partner and I'm going to have associate doctors. And so, but, so I'm doc@brighteyestampa.com. And, our webpage is brighteyestampa.com. And so you can find out information there. And I do have LinkedIn. It's, I think, Nate BW, but I don't really use that very much. I'm trying to think. That's pretty much the best way.
Fantastic. Yeah. And for my part, if you, the listener, if you are enjoying this episode, there's actually more waiting for you. We release extended versions of every episode that we do exclusively for our paid supporters, along with monthly bonus content that you won't find anywhere else. And it's about $12 a month, which is about the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. It helps support the show and brings on great guests like Nate and keeps the conversation growing about myopia management, which is the mission of this podcast, because we think myopia management is the greatest thing ever. And more ECPs should be doing it. So I like to say, if you would buy me a cup of coffee every week to have on amazing guests and nerd out about myopia management and spread the word, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. Head over to my website, myopiamindset.com, and become a supporter. We thank you very much for your consideration. Nate, I can't thank you enough for coming on this episode. I'm going to be at your lecture. I can't wait to see you at Vision by Design. It's going to be awesome. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Hey, always happy to do it.
All right. And for everybody else, we will see you at the next one.